Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we are joined by Alex Newman. I'm really excited to talk with him. He, of course, published the book Crimes of the Educated, and it's been praised by Dr. Ron Paul nonetheless. And I'd like you to go into what this book is about to our audience and tell them a bit about yourself as well.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Josh. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you guys here. The book, to condense 50 years worth of research into a soundbite. Basically, the government schools are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They were designed to dumb down the population, to indoctrinate the population, to make the population illiterate, and they were produced with Rockefeller money by a gentleman named John Dewey, spread the system across the country, and the same is true in Canada and many other Western countries. And so this is not an accident. A lot of people think, oh, if we just tweak this or reform that or change this, then everything will be okay. But they're not understanding that this was actually doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. So it's it's a travesty what's happening. The government's own numbers show that most Americans today either cannot read at all or can barely read. I mean, they read at such a low level that they'd struggle reading the back of a soup can. And so they'll never read the founding documents. They'll never read a real history book, a novel, a Bible, a constitution, none of that. And then they'll depend on the establishment lying media. So it's a huge danger to our country, to our freedoms, and to really everything that we hold dear.
Absolutely. When you look at one of the most prime examples of what we need to look towards in the future, individual liberty, this is one of the prime examples of how it is, I suppose you could say, crushed under the government's feet, because they can use the public education system, they can use the media, they can use these propaganda tools to indoctrinate people away from the message of liberty, away from the message of personal responsibility. And I'd like to hear what you think about this massive movement that's growing among a lot of college students, unfortunately today with the social justice warriors, and how now they need safe spaces. They need to play with Play-Doh. Yes, exactly. What do you think this is? What do you think the root of this is? Why is this happening right now?
Well, I would say I know what the cause of this is. It is the indoctrination in the schools. It was designed this way. The guy who he's literally the founding father of the modern progressive education system, which is what we call public schools. This is unquestioned. It's part of the historical record. His name is John Dewey, and he was very clear about his views. So we don't have to speculate and wonder what was he thinking. He told us what he was thinking. He wrote it all down. You can read it in his own essays. And he was a socialist at heart. He opposed individualism and said so. He believed in collectivism, and he thought, and you can read it in his own words, he thought the schools should shape the children so that they would be socialized to be part of this greater good, this community. The
greater good of the greater number, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And he went to the Soviet Union to see what Lenin was doing in education, thought it was a wonderful idea. And so this is the kind of mindset that this whole entire system came from. And so the people who think, well, if we just take that out of the curriculum, or if we just pay more money to teachers, or if we just increase the budget, things will get better. I mean, they're totally misunderstanding the problem. So the schools are doing what they were designed to do. And I think people have a hard time wrapping their minds around that. But the inevitable consequence is going to be the type of social justice warriors and lunatics that we see on college campuses. And eventually these guys grow up to be adults, and they're voters, and we have a real problem.
It seems almost reminiscent of things we've seen in the not-so-distant future in the last century. We've seen similar things happen in Nazi Germany, and people go, whoa, let's not equate what's happening today to Nazi Germany. Never do that. It's always a bad idea. I don't think so. I see a lot of similarities between what happened under Stalin and Lenin. I see a lot of similarities to many Maoist China. All these communist thresholds that we've watched destroy freedom, destroy individuality, and create these massive collectives over time. Do you think that I am correct in saying that there are these similarities?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you were exactly right. People don't realize Hitler and the Soviet regime were actually like this for many, many years. They both were reading from this same poison fruit that is Marxism. I mean, Marx was literally an advocate for exterminating human beings. He believed, for example, that civilizations, nations, peoples that were not even yet at the capitalist stage. And he mentioned some in Europe, the Basques, up in the highlands of Scotland. He said they haven't even reached capitalism yet. So we just need to get rid of them. I mean, he was a literal advocate of mass extermination of human beings. And so Hitler and Lenin and Stalin, they just had slightly different interpretations of the same evil ideology. And we see this manifested in the schools today. And believe it or not, John Dewey, a lot of his cohorts were actually racists, eugenicists. They believed that, for example, black people were inferior and should be weeded out of the gene pool. They believed in using eugenics. So the exact same philosophy that guided these people is what led to the atrocities in Nazi Germany. And there is a clear, direct, irrefutable link between them.
Wow. I think that it's rather standoutish, I suppose, when you look at the prime part of individual liberty is individual responsibility. You can't have liberty without responsibility. And what we see today is a great example of the destruction of personal responsibility, where we have generations and generations, not just the kids today, but going back many generations of people who depend. They are dependent on the government. They expect something to be extorted and stolen from the taxpayer and given to them instead of actually going out to do it themselves. I often hear, why can't I be successful from kids instead of what can I do to be successful? Do you see this often in your line of work?
Well, you know, that's the mindset that they're drilling into the children. This is literally the way that they want them thinking. They want them dependent, they want them dumb, they want them able to follow basic instructions, but certainly not capable of critical thinking, of, you know, advanced thought, of reading complex works of literature and, you know, the important works all through Western civilization. You know, all this knowledge is being lost. The kids don't even have the capability to read that if they wanted to. So, you know, there's nowhere that this ends that is anything other than tragedy unless we turn it around. It really is that serious. And, you know, it's fun to laugh about some of the crazy stuff that we see going on, but this is dead serious. I mean, we're talking about the future of our kids, our countries, and our liberties. What's more important than those things?
They're absolutely nothing, and that's the point, and that's why it's so great that you wrote this book. How did you get into this? What led you to this? I mean, everyone has their story. Some say they started off as a socialist, some say they started off as a conservative, some say they started off, you know, just not knowing anything and someone gave them a book or something. How did you get into this movement, and how did you learn to, I guess, not just question the establishment, but look towards not just collective thought, but individual thought?
Well, good question. You know, it's a long story, and I'll say that to start with, I was blessed with a fantastic education. I mean, I went to some of the best private schools on the planet, and unfortunately, they were heavy on indoctrination. I mean, I got a lot of pro-UN propaganda, a lot of globalism and humanism, but I was given the capacity to research for myself, to think for myself. And so about 17, 18, you know, I started feeling like kind of the Matrix theme, you know, we're at the Red Pill Expo. Something isn't right here. What's going on? This whole system is weird. And, you know, it was a documentary, actually Ed Griffin, the guy who organized this conference, he narrated it. It was about the United Nations and the atrocities that they perpetrated in Katanga. And for me, you know, this blew up everything I had learned. The UN was this wonderful savior of humanity. It was going to be so great. And then I heard that they were murdering women and children and bayoneting little kids and bombing hospitals. I said, to make people live under a communist dictator. I said, you got to be kidding me. So that really, you know, set me off on this trail of, okay, I got to figure out about, you know, everything, because if that's a lie, what else is a lie? Then, you know, the monetary system, started looking into that. Then, you know, the staged terrorist attacks, and, you know, eventually you realize, wow, everything I learned was a lie. So we got to start back at square one.
Yeah, it's a huge journey for everyone, and it never ceases to surprise me. You know, the level of change that one goes through over time as they start to learn about not just individual liberty, but, as you mentioned, kind of the false flags that we've seen, and just how this all goes into one gigantic bubble. And it's not just, you know, the media, it's not just education, it's not just, you know, the government, it's not just the banking system, it's a combination. And of course, one of the most important ones is education, because that is what links the rest, because people cannot become self-sufficient, self-responsible without actually being able to understand their place in the world as an individual rather than a collective. And when people are indoctrinated to think that communism is fair and capitalism is evil, that goes to show the vast amount of propaganda that we see today. And I don't know, what do you think about people, say, not even just going to private schools, not just homeschooling, but just dropping off the grid and just getting into books themselves and just saying goodbye to any form of formal education whatsoever?
You know, I'm a big believer in that, and I tell parents, and you know, when I speak, I say you would be better off taping your kid to a chair and putting him in a closet than sending him to a government school, because the government school will deliberately dumb them down, will totally ruin, scramble their brains, and you know, that's not what you want. So I'm a huge believer in leaving the education system. Actually, I was expelled from school and I never went back. It was stupid. It was just a waste of time. And you know, 99% of my education, beyond, you know, just the basic tools, how to read, how to write, those basic things, came on my own. You know, reading books, going to the library, that's where they hide all the secrets. So I'm a huge believer in, you know, separating the concepts of schooling and education, because schooling, as we understand it today, has nothing to do with education. It's almost the opposite. But real education is what people do on their own. You know, what motivates you, what drives you, what are you curious about, what do you want to learn about, and then go do it on your own.
Do you see the change coming when we see people like Betsy DeVos advocate homeschooling and then get called a Nazi, which is literally the opposite of what Nazis did?
And you know, the irony is incredible, because I've spent most of the last 10 years living in Europe writing about the brutal persecution of homeschoolers in Germany and Sweden and other countries. And the law in Germany that banned home education was actually passed under the Nazi regime. It's one of the few things that did not come out after the denazification program. So it's incredible the cognitive dissonance that must go on in these kids' minds to believe something like that. Unfortunately, I have my concerns about Betsy DeVos, but as far as the homeschooling goes, it was such a relief. And you know, the previous education secretary, Obama's final education secretary, John King, he said he was concerned about the homeschoolers, that they weren't getting all of the options that they needed. And he could not be more wrong. I mean, talk to any homeschooler, they're involved in co-ops, in you know, small groups, a family organization. They are absolutely out all the time. And I think it's incredibly encouraging. There's 6 million homeschoolers in America, more or less, and they are the future. You know, Ron Paul talks about this. These kids will be able to run circles around the government-schooled kids, so that gives me a huge amount of hope.
Yeah, I've watched the I've read the School Revolution, incredible book, and Ron Paul's an inspiration to us all, which is why I'm so impressed that if he is at the scale that he is at, and to read your book and be so impressed by that, I think other people should pick up your book, and we'll plug it again at the end, but I just want to point out the incredibility of the number of people who believe in government, period. So I have a lot of anarchist friends, and I'm not talking about these Antifa guys that are out on the streets. Those aren't anarchists. Those are like total communists. But more anarcho-capitalist voluntarist friends who homeschool their kids and don't even necessarily they show basic math and all that, but for the most part, they don't really keep a strict schedule. They don't tell the kid when they're going to do something, and they're rather freewheeling when it comes to it. And what I've seen from so many of these kids, as they've grown up, they become incredibly intelligent and incredibly skeptic of what they're told, and they question everything. And that's the exact opposite of what we see in the public school system, and to a large extent as well in the private school system. So what do you think of these anarchist parents, if you don't mind?
I love it. You know, I think we need to smash the model of education, quote unquote, I put that in quotes, that exists now, and allow for all sorts of experimentation. You know, if you want to unschool your kids, great, do it. I know parents who've unschooled their kids. They did an amazing job. You know, 16-year-olds going to some of the best universities. It's just incredible, because the thing is, children have this inborn desire to learn, to create, to do something useful, and it takes 12 years in a government brainwash camp to beat that out of them. And so, you know, I think there's something to be said for all these different forms. Now, personally, I think the classical model of education is probably the best, and that's my opinion. You know, I'm not a expert on which is the best model. What I can say is that the model that exists, the current paradigm, is worse than trash. And if people want to unschool, I say more power to you. And if you raise kids who are skeptic, that's wonderful. That's what we need. We need people who are skeptical.
Absolutely. I've often said the best thing I ever did in my entire life was dropping out of school in ninth grade. And, I picked up the books immediately and I started learning, because I learned more in the first year out of school than I did in all the years combined before that. And it's a real testament. And successful people, I find so often flunked out. Actually, we were talking to Robert Kiyosaki yesterday, and he was telling us he flunked. Steve Jobs flunked. Mark Zuckerberg flunked, regardless of what you think of these people.
Right, Bill Gates too.
Bill Gates, Einstein, Stephen Hawking. They all dropped out of school or flunked, and I think this is a great testament to how important it is to get individual education by your own decision, actually understanding things for yourself instead of being told what to think and what to feel and what to see. The whole see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And I think what you're doing is a really great thing and I think people really need to start to understand this, because we can't get anywhere in the liberty movement without the education, and we can't get anywhere in education in school. So Thank you very much for talking with us, and please plug your book one more time for our audience.
Awesome. It's Crimes of the Educators, How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. And for you in Canada, the same thing is going on up there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Do you like what you see here at WHAM? Well, make sure to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored by YouTube. You can also see our Bitcoin address in the description and the comments, as well as on the screen for you to scan, if you please. And also find us on steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid to blog via cryptocurrencies. You can find me at Josh Sigurdson. So we hope to see you there. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.